Hey guys, what's up? Dingo Crikey here with another commentary video, this time a character comparison of the Transformers movie versions of Sentinel Prime and Lockdown. So here's a topic that had been suggested by a number of users. Unfortunately, I didn't write down any of the names, but thanks to you all who gave this topic suggestion. In a previous video, I mentioned that I was going to be doing a Sentinel versus the Fallen video, but I pretty much just misspoke, and there wouldn't be much to talk about there in my opinion. But for this one, I do think there's a lot to talk about, despite the fact that these are quite different characters. They're both big villains in the Transformers film franchise, and they have significant enough attributes about their characters in the movies that I can make this kind of video. So in this video, I'll compare the characters on several different levels to make my best objective determination of who is not only the better character, but who is the better villain. Obviously, it is going to be kind of opinionated, so if you disagree with my conclusions, just drop it off in the comment section below. And one last note, this video will contain spoilers for Transformers Dark of the Moon and Transformers Age of Extinction. But for those of you who don't mind spoilers, let's get started. So, on an individual level, who is a better character? I'm gonna just kind of pick this apart at some different levels. So one thing that comes to mind a lot when analyzing a character is their backstory. This isn't something that's too common with many of the Transformer characters in the films, but Sentinel Prime does actually have more than most of the characters get. He was not only a former Prime, but also a mentor to Optimus, and obviously Optimus has a great deal of respect for him. Then we have the whole idea that he was entrusted to carry out the mission with the Pillars, he made the deal with Megatron sometime in the past, all of that kind of stuff. It's kind of glossed over in the movie, but it got as deep as Transformer character backstory development was going to get at the time. Other than maybe Jetfire, but it's been a while since I've seen Revenge of the Fallen. As far as backstory, Lockdown really doesn't have much. We know he's not part of either Autobot or Decepticon faction, at least at this point, and he works for some higher being dubbed the Creators. Now, for a lot of people, they probably would immediately give this win to Sentinel Prime. And I probably would too, but I will say there is a certain allure to having a mysterious character as opposed to one where we know a lot of their backstory. We kind of seen this with Heath Ledger's Joker as opposed to Jack Nicholson's one. We've seen a lot of Jack Nicholson's Joker's backstory, which was cool. Heath Ledger's one was mysterious, and most of his development just came from his on-screen time. I don't think either of these guys are on the level of those characters, but I think it does say something for Lockdown's more mysterious nature. I also don't think backstory should be used to compensate for on-screen development. I think that's ultimately more important, but in this case, Sentinel does win. He definitely has the better backstory and a more interesting one, especially for the films at the time. Having an Autobot, another Prime where Optimus was the only significant Prime character we had, unless you include the Fallen. Sentinel being this noble character who turned evil was definitely interesting. Then we have their connections with other characters. Sentinel has a backstory with Optimus, and obviously we see he doesn't really treat Megatron that well as a partner in crime. We are given the idea that Lockdown has some previous relation with maybe Ratchet, sort of like in Transformers Animated, and I didn't think of that till now, but that's pretty horrible when you think of animated. In Age of Extinction, Lockdown just kills Ratchet. That's depressing. Anyways, other than that, Lockdown doesn't really seem to know too many of the characters. But over the course of the movie, he does kind of develop a disdain for both Optimus Prime and Cade. So he does have that going for him. Still, I'm probably going to give the win in this case to Sentinel just because he has such a strong prior connection to Optimus Prime that Lockdown doesn't really have. And I think that's significant when looking at characters in a movie like this where they don't get a ton of development, the connections they do have to other characters mean a lot, and Sentinel has the upper hand in this case. Now, what about in-movie development? Well, neither of these guys have Luke Skywalker type development in the movies they appear in. They're pretty much the same character at the start of the movie into their death of the movie. Sentinel, we do have the reveal of his betrayal, but that was something beforehand. It wasn't something he was convinced of halfway through the movie, so I don't think it counts as in-movie development. As far as Lockdown, as mentioned, he does kind of have that building antagonism towards Cade and Optimus, and even though that's all there is, he probably has a slight upper hand in this case just because of that. Moving on to the next category, who is the more entertaining villain? Looking at Sentinel Prime, he does have a really cool backstory. However, I don't think the character himself is all that fun to watch. And if you're not a fun character, you should be able to make up with it by being more interesting. But once we get past the whole betrayal thing, this guy isn't all that cool to see. He basically becomes a nasty bad guy who wants to destroy Earth, where the biggest entertaining thing about him is that he's voiced by Leonard Nimoy, which definitely was really cool. But the character himself was kind of stoic, which I guess is what you should expect by someone who was voiced by Leonard Nimoy, but not really in an entertaining way. Lockdown, on the other hand, in my opinion, was a very fun character to watch. For one thing, he has a totally different agenda from the other characters in the film, so he sort of has this air about him where he thinks everyone's beneath him without taking a Megatron approach to it. Rather than shouting, he just makes his comment that, what, you think you're the center of the universe. I think that, and just the way he handles situations, is really cool to watch. Also, it's nice seeing the way he builds up that antagonism with Optimus over the course of the movie. He also works independently, and is one of the few characters in these movies that doesn't so much have that big monster feel to him. He actually felt like a legitimate character who just didn't get enough development. I mean, they could have made this guy like a human character in a movie about people, and I think he would have passed really well. He's just a really cool character to watch. Sentinel's got a cool backstory, but he's not that entertaining. Maybe that just has to do with the fact that Dark of the Moon is kind of a boring movie in my opinion. But anyways, moving on to the next category, what do these two guys bring to the movie? Well, they both score a lot of points in this area. They aren't just like some previous villains who are basically just bad guys because they're bad, or simply your other characters who are usually just interchangeable Autobots and Decepticons. Sentinel brings in this whole backstory for Optimus, the idea of bringing Cybertron to Earth, and a little bit more humanity to the Transformers, though he is kind of dry. Lockdown, on the other hand, looks like he's going to be our introduction to a whole bigger part of this Transformers cinematic universe, with him talking about the creators, Optimus now going into space to find them. Then, of course, he breaks the Autobot Decepticon dynamic of basically being a Transformer who might not even be working for a bigger Transformer. He's possibly working for something like the Quintessons. And he also gave us the chance to see a bounty hunter Transformer, which was definitely really cool. So I think in this area it's kind of a tie. They both brought a lot of cool stuff to the movies. Unfortunately, both of them had pretty short lifespans, but that brings us to how the characters were handled and which had a better presentation in the film. Despite some characters like Megatron and the Fallen just showing up basically as big bads, and Megatron's case just showing up towards the end of the film, Sentinel Prime was introduced with way more of a backstory, and the conflict caused by his character is a big point of the film. But however good of a character Sentinel Prime could have potentially been, I think he was kind of hurt by the way he was handled. For one thing, he's introduced relatively late in the movie. Not late compared to Megatron in the first film, but still it takes a while till he shows up. Also, he does spend most of the movie just standing on the towers, rambling about the pillars, beating up Megatron, all that kind of stuff. And ultimately, we don't see a whole lot of this inner turmoil within him. If you want to hear more of my thoughts on this, you could check out my video, Should Optimus Have Forgiven Sentinel? But basically, I think Sentinel's character suffers a bit from untapped potential. Basically, we have this character who could have been this very conflicted person between his loyalty to the Autobots and protecting Cybertron. We get someone who just basically turns into a psychopath who's willing to kill anyone so he can get what he wants. If Sentinel did show more compassion, I think he would have been an excellent character. Let's say instead of killing Ironhide, in his scheme he has a few of the Autobots captured, and maybe they even do a time skip to where he and the Decepticons have the Autobots working as slaves for them on this now half Earth, half Cybertron type planet. If we were to see Sentinel being more compassionate to some of the Autobots as opposed to the brutal enslaving Decepticons, and the Autobots just basically treating him like a traitor, and him going through that whole conflict, he could have been a really, really cool character. But there's just not enough conflict within him, especially for the character he could have been. He's basically a Autobot who turned psychopath. So, he was handled okay in the movies, not as good as he could have been. Lockdown doesn't initially have all of the depth that Sentinel Prime does, but I think the movie handles him pretty well. For one thing, he's introduced very, very early in the film and stays throughout a lot of the movie. There are always kind of gaps where certain characters disappear in the films, but Lockdown's there through a lot of Age of Extinction, and that's a big plus. And while he doesn't have all of the crazy depth that Sentinel could have had, for the type of character he is, he fits the role adequately. And then enjoyability comes in. He's a much more entertaining character to watch, in my opinion. All in all, though, I think he was just handled much better, so it's a bit difficult to say. And if you were to give me the on-paper backgrounds for both of these characters, I would probably say Sentinel, but seeing the way they were handled in the movies alone, I am going to go with Lockdown as the better character. Now, who is the better villain, since this is sort of a different type of category? Basically, who fits those shoes as being the baddie of the movie better? This is, of course, a difficult comparison. While not even the villain characters in these movies get a whole lot of screen time, or development for that matter, Lockdown and Sentinel are definitely the better of the few. And of course, people like to determine who's the better villain in their own ways. They might have their own merits, but let's try to do a general comparison anyways, by looking at the pros and cons of each. Sentinel, what pros does he have? Well, he's a former good guy turned bad, which isn't something we had seen in the movies before, and it's a lot different from just having Galvatron, who is pretty much just a bad guy, and the Fallen being the bigger, just bad guy on top of him. Sentinel was definitely a change of pace. Though many of us predicted he would in fact betray the Autobots, he still was unique. And he was also a very tough opponent. I mean, this guy defeated Optimus twice in the films. The second time was after being bombarded by the attacks of humans and the other Autobots. So, he was definitely a tricky opponent to beat. He also had the threatening factor going for him by the fact he kills Ironhide in his initial betrayal. That also contributes to us as the audience wanting to see Sentinel get it. Hateability is a difficult thing when it comes to a bad guy, because there are some bad guys we hate because they just are really crappy at their roles as a villain. I would say the Fallen fills out this category much better, but Sentinel Prime, you kind of hate him because he's good as a villain. So I think much of the hate we have for Sentinel is in a good way, though I wouldn't say all of it is. And at some level he can be sympathized with because his motive isn't just absolute power or destroying for bloodlust, though I believe he does do that in other instances in the film. However, his overall goal is one that's more admirable, though the way he goes about doing it definitely isn't. And he took center stage as the villain. Yeah, Megatron was there, but Sentinel was the primary poster boy for this film. Technically it was Shockwave because they didn't want to spoil Sentinel, but in the actual film, it did appear to be Sentinel. But what cons does he have as a villain? Big one I would say is that he didn't live up to his potential. This guy was a former Prime and mentor to Optimus, and we don't get a lot of backstory on him throughout the film. And because of that and his actions in the film, he ends up feeling pretty one-dimensional. So whereas we could have had this very complex former Autobot turned evil, we're kind of left with the impression that this guy used to be an Eddard Stark and one day he just woke up as the governor. Not really that cool. He also had limited screen time despite being the big bad. Now I think it's admirable that he did have more screen time than our previous villains, but not really enough. And once again, while he does have a motivation which we can sympathize with, his methods are so extreme and he really doesn't show any remorse for doing what he does, well, until he's about to die, that we can't sympathize with him all that much. So to sum up Sentinel Prime's cons, he doesn't live up to his potential. What do we have for Lockdown? He has the pros of being a unique villain. We had Sentinel before this. Lockdown isn't the leader of some big army, some guy claiming to conquer. He's pretty much doing his job as a bounty hunter. He does have a level of arrogance, but he's not out to control the universe or restore Cybertron. Nothing like that. And I think it should be said for him that he doesn't overstep those bounds as some other characters in Transformers who start out as simplistic villains, then become nutcases by the end. He stays pretty true to his character. He also has a threatening personality, from his condescending word and tones, from his overall confidence. He's pretty intimidating, but primarily because he has the toughness to back it up, and he seems to know what his limits are. He doesn't just go on a killing spree to knock out all the humans, or look to destroy all of the Autobots. He knows what his mission is, and he seeks to accomplish that, and since he's so good at it, he's built up an air about him over time. He also has an air about him that makes us really not like him as much as a viewer, but once again in kind of the good way, that he just comes and acts like he's basically above all of the other characters, that there's this whole universe that makes the matters of the past 3 films seem really irrelevant. And the way he flaunts this information kind of goes with his arrogant personality. He also built up intimidation by killing off Ratchet, though I feel a lot of us hated that cocky trenchcoat guy much more than we actually hated Lockdown just because he was annoying. Also, unlike Sentinel Prime, Lockdown, I feel like, pretty much lives up to his expectations. He's a bounty hunter who has made an alliance with the humans, kills some Autobots, does bounty hunter stuff, shows off all of his technology, introduces us to a bigger world, and though viewers such as myself may have found his death in the end of Age of Extinction a bit of a letdown considering it would have been cool to see him last longer, he fulfilled a lot of the purposes you would expect him to have. He didn't have a deep backstory, but we really wouldn't expect that from a character like Lockdown. It would probably feel pretty forced unless he survived long enough, so he seems as if he's a pretty solid villain, but he definitely has some cons. Some may consider the fact that he died too soon to be a con, along with the fact that he's a smaller scale villain than a guy like Megatron. Personally, maybe the soon death I see as a con. The small scaleness I kind of found refreshing, so I wouldn't consider that one. A con his villainous presence definitely has due to Age of Extinction is the fact that he has to share the villain role with Galvatron and hence kind of comes in and out of the film. Now he still has a ton of screen time, at least for a Transformers character, but I do find this to be kind of unfortunate. Also, while we probably didn't expect him to be as in-depth as someone like Sentinel probably should have been, he did seem a little cartoony and one-dimensional at points. Still better than other villains we've had, but a little too much, just always yelling at people and stuff like that. Not always losing his temper, but just kind of being mouthy and annoying at times. With all of those qualities in consideration, I think you could really argue for either one. It's really a matter of preference of what kind of villain you like, because they're just different villains. Ultimately, I think it comes down to how they're handled in the overall story of the movie. And this is where I think Lockdown has the advantage. Sentinel at a certain point just kind of takes the back seat and becomes the figurehead for the new bad guys. If you're watching the movie, you can kind of forget he's even there or what the goal really is. There's just a lot of Decepticons destroying the city, and occasionally he'll shout something into the battle until his final fight with Optimus. Between Sam Witwicky's romance, the Autobots leaving, and then just the typical big battles of the Transformers films, you can kind of forget Sentinel is really there. He also isn't conscious until about 52 minutes into the movie. That definitely hurts him a little bit. Lockdown does suffer from some of these same things, as he kind of shares the villain role with Galvatron and weaves his way in and out of the story, but I feel like a lot of the conflict that actually happens with Lockdown is way more special to his character. When Galvatron is not the threat, Lockdown is pretty prevalent in the film, and we get lots of scenes with him, whether it's communicating with the humans, giving them the seed, talking to Attinger, communicating with Optimus, kind of just monitoring the whole situation, giving his perspective on things. We get a lot of time with Lockdown, and as an audience member, it would be much harder to forget his significance in the movie as this bounty hunter. And I also think one of the keys that sells it for him is that he appears so much earlier in the film, probably being the first major villain of these Transformer films to actually do this, which I think ultimately helps to put him above Sentinel Prime. I could see it going either way, and they're kind of just different types of villains. Ultimately, I think Lockdown was handled better. Sentinel might have had the potential to be a better villain. Ultimately, though, it wasn't really lived up to. And maybe these are some of my personal opinions bleeding in here, because personally, I do like Lockdown as a character much better. He was a lot funner to watch. He was an interesting villain. I'm always excited to see a villain who really isn't part of the Autobot-Decepticon conflict and can just come in and put it down, because after 30 years, Autobot versus Decepticon all the time, except, Beast Wars and occasional breaks here and there, gets kind of repetitive. Lockdown was definitely refreshing. He was also a cool character. I think you can kind of respect him in ways, at least as a villain. He does keep up on his deals. He did give the humans the seed. He was kind of a jerk about it, but he did what he said he was going to do. He seems to be a much smarter villain than some of the ones in the past, which is admirable, and he's not afraid to get his hands dirty. He doesn't have an army to just go out and do all of his dirty work, so that's also kind of cool to see. Sentinel, he was a good villain. I did enjoy the whole conflict with him and Optimus, but ultimately I didn't think he was a very likable character. He really came off like a jerk, which isn't a problem if you're Lockdown or Galvatron, but I would expect something different from Sentinel Prime, and it was just kind of unlikable to me. That's just my personal opinion on it, though. Now, real quick, who would win in a fight? I really, really want to say Lockdown. Ultimately, I think it's going to go to Sentinel, though. Look at it. He defeated Optimus twice. Lockdown also basically defeated Optimus, but Sentinel was able to do so after heavy fire from all of the other Autobots and the military, still being able to come out on top in the end. Surprise attack from Megatron he really couldn't fight against, but I'm sure in an equal fight between the two, Sentinel could probably beat him. Being that he's a Prime, we know they have some inherent skills, toughness, intelligence, that kind of thing. He also has the Rust Blaster, some other blaster that seemed to be pretty powerful, the double-edged blade, and the shield, which I think would really come in handy when fighting Lockdown. Lockdown's definitely pretty strong himself. Grenades, missiles, lots of explosives. He seems to be very skilled in combat and makes up for his lack of brute strength with his skill. But if Sentinel Prime has his blades and the Rust Blaster, I don't think Lockdown's going to stand much of a chance. If Sentinel didn't use the Rust Blaster as he only used it once in the actual films, Lockdown might stand a better chance. I think ultimately Sentinel's going to come out on top. He was almost untouchable in the fight with Optimus because of his weapons. It might be kind of a toss-up. Ultimately, though, I would be wagering that, yeah, Sentinel probably would beat Lockdown, maybe even like a 70-30 chance. If neither of them had any weapons, Lockdown might have a better chance, but you still gotta take Sentinel Prime's size into account. I mean, Optimus did also have size, but Sentinel pretty much owned Optimus, so he seemed significantly stronger. So to wrap things up, I think Lockdown ultimately is the better character and the better villain. Personally, I like him better too. More likable character, funner to watch, and he reached his potential. Sentinel lacked in a lot of those areas. The movie didn't handle him the best way, and while he could have been one of the greatest Transformer villains, he just wasn't handled in a manner that allowed him to be. However, yeah, I do think Sentinel would win if the two were to fight. That's all I have for this video though. Leave your thoughts in the comment section below. Do you agree that Lockdown is not only a better character but a more likable character than Sentinel Prime? Who do you think is the cooler villain? Maybe you think Lockdown would win if the two were to fight. Along with your thoughts on this video, let me know if you guys enjoy these character comparison videos. Would you like to see more on a regular basis? Do you think I should compare them in more categories, or that some of these are poor for comparison? And who would you like to see future character comparisons on? It doesn't have to be characters from the same universe. Could be like Energon Ironhide versus RID Sideswipe. Could be better character, or better villain, better leader, better as a comic relief, whatever you're interested in. I already have a suggestion for Sideswipe and Drift, which I do plan to do soon, and hopefully that one won't drag on as long as this one has. Unless you guys enjoy the long videos, but even then, Drift and Sideswipe, yeah, I don't think there's as much to talk about. Stay tuned for more Transformers news and commentary, updates on Combiner Wars, Takara figures, TF5, etc., and Transformers figure reviews, of course. Thanks for watching, have a good one guys, and I will see you soon.